I'm David Murphy. Over the last couple of years, some fantastic colleagues and I have produced some videos on the process of applying for and being interviewed for clinical psychology training in the UK. We hope the videos might be useful for people applying for other courses as well, and also for people outside the UK. Now this year in the UK, all clinical psychology interviews are going to be held online rather than face-to-face. So I promised to do another video focusing specifically on doing interviews online. The first thing I want to say about online interviews is that everything that we said in the two previous videos about interviews still applies to online interviews. The interviews are being held for the same purpose. The interviewers are looking for exactly the same competencies as they are in face-to-face interviews. So I think it's really important to make sure you don't focus too much on the fact that it's online, and do remember why the interview is happening, and always keep in mind what the purpose is and what the interviewers are looking for, what their job is. And what you can do as an interviewee is to help make their job easier by helping them to see the competencies that they're looking for. However, online interviews are different from face-to-face interviews in a number of ways. In order to do your best, you will need to plan ahead. But don't panic. Although there are some challenges, there are also some positives. It means that you won't be being interviewed sitting in someone else's office in an unfamiliar building. And it means you won't have to travel a long distance to get there and worry about being late. In fact, you can sit in your own home surrounded by familiar things. Also, if the interview doesn't go as smoothly as you'd hoped, you'll just be able to log out and immediately you'll be back in the privacy of your own home and not having to contend with the other applicants. The key to a successful online interview is preparation. And I don't mean reading psychology textbooks, I mean practical preparation. There are a number of issues that you'll need to consider, including location, reducing disturbances, lighting, the right equipment, setting up a webcam, having a backup plan, managing the online interview, and the use of cheat sheets. And these are the issues that I'm going to cover in the rest of this video. First thing to think about is whereabouts you're going to do the interview. Now, assuming you don't live in a great big mansion, you're not going to have a massive choice about which room you're going to do the interview in. But you do want to think about what's going to be the most quietest room where you're not going to be disturbed and there's not going to be noise coming from outside, for example. Once you've identified the room that you're going to do the interview in, you want to also get rid of any potentially noisy distractions from within that room. And you do need to think about this because sometimes they're not entirely obvious until you're in the middle of an interview and the phone next to you rings and you have to try and turn it off. So if there's any landlines in the room, you're going to want to disconnect those. Also, your mobile phone, make sure it's set to silent, and also your laptop or PC or iPad that you're doing the interview on. We'll talk about in a minute about what you use, but you want to make sure that you've turned off any notification noises. So this is a bit more tricky because you'll have to obviously keep the sound on, otherwise you won't be able to hear what they're saying. But you do want to make sure it doesn't keep pinging every time you get a message. It always amazes me that people, even people doing sort of big, talks over the last year online, often don't turn those off, and so the whole way through you keep hearing a pinging noise. So try and identify if there's going to be any noises that your computer's going to make, so that it doesn't distract from. I guess the thing is that your interviews aren't going to be disqualify you because you're making a pinging noise, but you don't want to have to make it harder for them to be concentrating on you when there's a pinging or some other noise in the background. So try and make it easy for them to concentrate on all the amazing things that you've got to say. And also, before the interview, make sure you tell everyone who's going to be in their house that you're going into an interview, and you might want to put a do not disturb sign on the door. The other thing you need to think about in addition to sound is light. And people generally say that if you're sitting for an online interview, you want to be ideally facing a window. although make sure obviously that the sun isn't going to be directly in your eyes if you're sitting facing a window. If you can't have a natural light source directly on you, then people generally suggest you shouldn't have artificial light just from one direction, so just the light from above you, because that can create funny kind of shadows. Now, I mean, obviously you're not shooting a Hollywood movie, so you don't need a elaborate light setup, but it does, you know, the interviewers are going to be looking at you, and they're going to be obviously looking at your face, and so, you know, you do want them to be able to see you. And it's actually not that complicated, again, if you think about it ahead of time, because you've got plenty of light sources in your house. So, okay, so now you've found where you're going to do the interview. The next thing is to think about what equipment you're going to use for the interview. Now, there's three key things that you're going to need in the equipment. One is a camera, the other is a microphone, and the other is a screen so that you can see the other people that are on the interview, who are interviewing you. Now, of course, your phone is going to have all three of those in it, and there's no reason, well, there is a reason not to use a phone, but technically all of those things are perfectly adequate in a phone. Certainly the camera and the microphone will be perfectly adequate in your phone. However, obviously in a phone, your screen is going to be too small to be able to see properly the people that you're being interviewed, and also of course you're going to have to hold it in your hand. So I would strongly recommend you don't use a phone, or indeed actually I would recommend that you don't use an iPad either. A laptop or a PC are absolutely fine. Okay, so as I say, either a laptop or a PC is fine. This is a picture of the setup that I'm using for this video, and I've put a picture of an interview panel up there, although obviously your panel won't be sitting all at one table, they'll be in all separate boxes of a Zoom screen. But so the things about this setup, which is linked to a PC, that are helpful are not the fact that it's got three screens. That's really not relevant at all for this. You probably turn the others off if you were doing an interview. But the main thing is it's got a nice big screen that you can see the people on your panel quite clearly. And the most important thing is that it's got a nice separate webcam, which is well positioned. You can easily position this. In this case, it's got a microphone integrated in the webcam. If you have AirPods or another kind of microphone, then it's perfectly good to use that. A lot of people use headsets, and I personally don't like using a headset, but the audio people say that they're better to use a headset. I guess whatever you feel comfortable with. But the key thing is to have a good mic that's going to pick up your voice, and as I say, to have a good webcam. Now, this is the equivalent setup with a laptop, and so in this case, I've got my laptop and I've got my interview panel all ready to interview me. And the key thing I've done is to adjust the height of the laptop screen, and more importantly the camera, so that it's at the right height. So really, if you're adjusting the screen, you want your eye line to be about sort of 2/3 up the screen, so that you can easily switch between the camera and looking at the interview panel. Now, it would be easier for you if they were all sitting in a line like this. They'd realistically be all in how many people you've got in different boxes on your screen. So you're going to have to remember to scan through them to check for that they're paying attention, that they're following what you're saying. But positioning the screen, having a nice big screen as big as you can, are sort of keys to doing that. And then we'll talk about the camera in a second. Okay, so now you're all set up, either with your laptop at the right level or on a PC, ideally with a separate webcam. We need to talk about how you take account of the webcam during the interview, because what is very, very easy to do is to look at the people interviewing you on the screen rather than the webcam during the interview. So if I talk now, looking at me on the screen, you'll see that I'm not looking at you directly. And whereas if I talk directly to the camera, it seems that I'm talking directly to you. And this is it seems like a minor thing, but it does make a difference. And this is a tricky thing about doing an interview over an online setup, because usually the two are together. When you look at a picture of somebody, when you look at somebody, you're talking directly at them, whereas on a webcam setup, you can be looking at the picture of them and they'll be perceiving that you're looking away from them. Now, it seems strange to be worrying about this because you would have been doing Zoom calls and Skype calls, FaceTime, probably several times a day for the last year. But the thing about your friends and family is that they know you so well that they aren't going to be put off by you looking around and not looking directly at them. Whereas an interview is a much more formal situation, and also the interviewer's attention is going to be focused directly on you. They're going to be looking directly at your face. And again, it's about trying not to create a distraction. And if someone's looking away, it just creates a distraction. It doesn't help to focus their attention. So I would encourage you to spend a bit of time practicing looking directly at the camera and speaking at the camera rather than at the screen. So set up a mock interview with a friend over whatever, Skype or whatever, but make sure that you're actually talking to the camera, and have a separate webcam set up so that you're talking directly at the camera, not at the screen, and your friend can give you feedback on being able to do it. It doesn't come naturally. It does take some doing, but the effect on how you come across will be better if you can practice doing that. With all these things, I should say, the point about doing them in advance is that that you don't have to think about them on the day. On the day of the interview, you shouldn't be thinking about anything else other than the question that the person asks you and what you know about that. So you shouldn't be thinking about light, you shouldn't be thinking about the computer or anything like that. So all these things I'm talking about now, these are things to get sorted out in advance. Practice them, then you won't have to think about them on the day. When you're doing an interview online, there's such temptation to use prompts and cheat sheets because the interviewers just see your face and have no idea that actually you're surrounded by notes and reminders. As I say, this is so tempting to do with an online interview because why wouldn't you? You've just, it seems stupid not to have all your notes around you. However, I would caution you from my own experience of doing TV interviews where I had lots of things that I wanted to get across in the interview and I was terrified that I'd forget about them. So I had lots of notes around me, and all I actually in the interview found them was that they were distracting, and I either couldn't look at them properly, or if I did look at them properly, I hushed up the interview because I wasn't looking at the interviewer. So I think if you're constantly looking over to notes, the interviewer will realise it instantly. I mean, I've done videos and it's tempting to have a script for a video, but you just can't do it because soon as even if you just read, it's clear from your eyes where that you're reading from notes, and that's really not going to be a good look for an interview. And also, I think you need to just take a step back and think about what the interview's there for. The interviewers aren't expecting you to be able to, churn out lots of facts and figures. Realistically, you come into that interview with lots of knowledge that you have over the years of studying psychology and your experience. and that's already inside. It's worth rehearsing that in terms of thinking about what sort of things you know, and how you might communicate that in terms of case sort of studies that you've worked with. But actually at the time, it's really not going to do you much good to have lots of notes around you. You might find it helpful to have just literally bullet points. So if there are some clients that you've worked with that you want to use as examples, maybe just literally one word for each client, and as a reminder more than notes, because you're not going to be able to refer to notes. So just one word to remind you of particular things that you were wanting to draw on, but no more than that. Or even sort of pictures or images, but not sort of great sentences and so on. Another thing that people often ask is about what to wear for an online interview. Do the same rules apply? I think probably the same rule applies in that it's always safer to overdress than underdress for an interview. Although I would say that from my experience, what people wear for online interviews does tend to be a sort of notch down in terms of formality than face-to-face interviews. So, for example, when I did my interview, I would normally wear a tie if I'm going for a job interview, but I decided not to for the online interview just because it seemed a bit strange to be walking around your own house wearing a tie. And I think people do still dress smartly, but not quite the same as they would do for an interview. But definitely do wear something that makes you feel like you're in interview mode. And it's always safer to be slightly smarter than slightly more casual. Again, with all these things, I think you just want to be feeling confident and being able to focus on the interview rather than what you're wearing. So certainly don't wear anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. There's the perennial question of whether you should just worry about the top half and wear your pajamas for the bottom half. I think most advice is that it helps you get into the mindset to be sort of fully in your interview outfit. So certainly I do that, and I think a lot of people say that they do that, wear smart trousers as well, even though they're not going to be seen on the camera. So again, all of these things, it's helpful just to think about beforehand. The things with the equipment, try them out beforehand, and particularly with the computer equipment, the other thing to bear in mind is to have a backup plan. So there's two things that could potentially go wrong on the day. One is that you could have some glitch with your computer hardware, the laptop or PC, and run into problems with that. The other is that you could have a problem with your internet provider, and actually both of those have happened to me while I've been doing online things over the last year. So just think about what you would do in those cases. So you want to have an idea of what you would use as a backup. So if you've got a PC, then have a laptop that you could use if you have a problem with that, or a tablet, or I think if people realise that it's your backup option, there'll be people understand if you're using a phone or whatever. In terms of your internet failing, then have a way of using data or a Wi-Fi hotspot or something that's an alternative to your primary way of accessing the internet. Again, don't, if that happens, don't panic. Everyone will understand. I'm sure that they'll give you another opportunity, but it's just going to be less stressful for you and also easier for them if you've got a backup that you can immediately sort of switch to. Okay, I think that covers pretty much everything I wanted to run through with you. Let's just do a quick summary of what the points that we've covered. Okay, so let's just summarize the points that we've covered. There are a few things that you can do before the interview so that you don't need to worry about them on the day of the interview. One is to identify the best location that you want to do the interview from. Once you've done that, identify anything within the room that might happen outside the room that could be distracting and remove that if at all possible. Also think about your own computer, if there's anything that you can stop notifications and noises popping up. Optimize the lighting, which sounds complicated, but actually is really simple and may just involve you practicing and identifying a different source of light. Really important is to think ahead about what equipment you're going to use. Ideally, as a laptop or a PC are absolutely fine, but ideally with a separate webcam that you can set at your eye level. Make sure that you plan for failure in the computer, the hardware that you're using. So if there's a problem with that one day, what you can use instead, and also if there's a problem with your internet access, identify a backup option. Okay, and there are a few things that you need to think about related to the interview itself. And I say think about them, but if you think about them before the interview, you won't need to think about them during the interview itself because they'll be natural. The first one, as we've mentioned, is to practice looking and speaking into a camera rather than speaking at the screen, which is what's natural to do. The other is to resist the urge to surround yourself with lots of cheat sheets and reminder notes. And I know from experience it's such a strong temptation, but my suggestion is that it will just make you more anxious to surround yourself with lots of cheat sheets because you'll be just constantly distracted by them. Limit your prompts to single words and just a couple of post-its to remind you of things that you already know. Focus on what's important in the interview. Don't be distracted by the technology. Just try and this can be difficult to get into interview mode and remember you're in an interview, but do focus on what the interviewers are asking you and making sure you answer the question that they're asking. Not, and again, I can speak from experience, not answering the question that you wish they'd asked in great detail, but listening to what they're actually asking you and answering their question. And we go into a lot of that in the 2 other videos. So if you haven't looked at those, then definitely do give those a look. And lastly, but definitely not least, be yourself. Okay, and so again, just to reiterate, there are some things you need to think about an online interview, and you do need to think about them in advance. But the reason for doing that is so that you can concentrate while you're on the interview on the most important thing, which is about listening to what the questions are, thinking about what the interviewers are asking, what they're looking for. These are all the things we covered in the other videos. And then also making sure that you help the interviewers out by giving them the evidence of the skills and competencies and values that you have that would make you a great clinical psychology trainee. So these don't get hung up on the aspects of the online interview. You're not going to be given a place because you're a great online interviewee or a sort of a YouTube sensation. It's going to be because you're a good clinical psychology prospective trainee. But it is helpful just to think about these things to make sure they don't get in the way of you communicating your skills and competencies. So I hope this has been helpful, and I really wish you all the very best.